Representation has always been a complicated issue, with many attempts to utilize Native American culture in fiction backfiring badly. Numerous tropes surround the use of indigenous characters, and even ones that are meant to be positive frequently do more harm than good. The noble savage trope is particularly egregious. This trope, which is meant to glorify Native cultures unrealistically, has led to numerous misconceptions and misguided expectations concerning the way of life of many Native cultures. The noble savage trope, which is defined as a representative of primitive humankind as idealized in romantic literature, symbolizing the innate goodness of humanity when free from the corrupting influence of civilization, is problematic for many reasons. First of all, it displays Native people as well savage and lacking in basic societal constructs which most humans take for granted. It also displays them as unrealistically benevolent and lacking in human complexity. This trope is particularly painful in children's literature. Most children's literature informing about Native Americans, with the very first Americans by Kara Ashros being my example for this presentation, embraces the noble savage trope to an embarrassing degree, while at the same time barely touching on the genocide committed upon them by the colonists. Thus, it is very refreshing to find children's literature which portrays the First Nations people realistically and also details their plight at the hands of colonials. The two books I will be covering today shed light on a particularly grim point in Native history and remain profound today, given current events surrounding the treatment of marginalized groups in America. From the late 19th to the mid-20th century, boarding schools were set up with the purpose of destroying Native cultures and assimilating young Native Americans into European-style post-colonial American culture. These boarding schools took Native American children out of their parents' arms and forcefully made them assimilate to European culture. These religiously based organizations forcefully changed their children's names to European-style ones. They forced them to wear European-style clothes and cut their hair in traditional European manners. They were forbidden from speaking in their native tongue and forced to learn English. Their indigenous religions were banned and they were forcefully converted to Christianity. There were many cases of sexual, manual, physical, and mental abuse, and the trauma of being removed from their families was harsh, particularly for younger children. Churches of many denominations were paid by the government to enact this moral atrocity. This all happened under the watch of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, a government organization designed to persecute Native tribes and force them to assimilate. This was a harsh, cold-blooded attempt to destroy numerous cultures, and many different tribes and ethnicities were affected. The worst part in many ways was the fact that many people thought that doing this would help the Native children by civilizing them and indoctrinating them into the Christian religion. This stemmed from the idea that First Nations cultures were primitive and unsophisticated, tying disturbingly into a troubling white man's burden mindset. The book Cheyenne, again by Eve Bunting, covers this topic in its relation to a Cheyenne child. Telling the story through the child's eyes, it goes into great detail about his loneliness and pain and the loss of his heritage. In the story, he describes being taken away from his parents, being forced to cut his braids and wear European clothing, and being lectured about the Judeo-Christian God without mention of his native religion. In the climax of the book, he runs away and gets lost in a blizzard, but is found by mercenarial trackers and brought back to the school. The book concludes with him fantasizing about Cheyenne warriors and riding away with them, trying desperately to hold onto the heritage that was ripped away from him. Stolen Words by Melanie Florence is a simpler but still profound story. It tells the story of a little Cree girl in contemporary times who comes home from school and asks her grandfather what the Cree word for granddaughter is. Unable to tell her, he falls into despair and recounts the story of his childhood, being taken from his parents and brought to a similar boarding school. Unable to understand his anguish, but sympathetic nonetheless, she goes to the school the next day and brings home an English to Cree dictionary for him to read. Unlike Cheyenne, again, the story leaves most of the abductive Native child's experiences to the imagination and mostly focuses on his despair over the loss of his heritage as an adult. These events are eerily similar to current policies in the Trump era concerning immigration. Both involve children being ripped from their parents' arms over racial and ethnic conflict. Much like the attempted extermination of indigenous languages, Latin American immigrants are being persecuted for speaking languages other than English. I'm not going to mince words here. The idea of American citizens speaking only one language is inherently racist. Persecution of native language speakers and persecution of Spanish speakers both stem from the same place, a belief in the inherent superiority of the English tongue any belief that speaking different languages will somehow make individuals incompatible with society. The policy of removing children from their parents is also similar. However, it could be argued that the modern practice is more wholly malicious in nature. While the initial attempt to assimilate Native children was based on a misguided and ethnocentric, but still in its own twisted way, well-meaning belief of a white man's burden, the current policy is meant as a punishment to inflict suffering on people merely for engaging in exodus from their war-torn regions and entering a country they believe to be safer. However, the emotions felt by the parents of their children are ripped away from them, and by the children terrified by their sudden isolation in a strange and foreign land are essentially the same. Both policies stem from inherently racist and ethnocentric belief systems and the superiority of a European-dominated America, and both have the same tragic results. Thank you.